What I wanted to look at tonight is the rest of the Torah service, the second half of the Torah service, putting the Torah away. And I want to let that also lead us into a discussion a little bit of Ashrei, because we recite Ashrei, that's Psalm 145, at the end of the Torah service. Really fast at the end of the Torah service. It seems maybe superfluous or unnecessary or extra or anything like that. But Psalm 145, that psalm is the most recited psalm. It's recited at least twice every day, and sometimes more. And so we're going to talk about that and learn a little of the Talmudic text that tries to understand the text of the Ashrei and why it has such a central place. So we have a two-purpose class today. One is to return the Torah to the Ark after the full Torah service is done, and then to explore the Ashrei a little bit through the sugya, the passage in the Talmud that discusses why we say this one multiple times a day. Okay, let's go back to our Siddur here. Just as a quick review of the first part of the Torah service. It's nice and big here. There we go.
What page are we looking at?
We're looking in the Siddur. Hang on here. I made it bigger and I lost my place. Okay, the Torah service begins on page 168. And we talked about how the Torah service opens with a particular quotation from the Bible that talks about when the ark moved in the desert. Right, we're recreating that kind of experience. Vayehi, when binasoa ha'aron, when the ark was carried, Moses would say, Kuma Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha v'yanusu nisanecha mipanecha. Rise up, Adonai, scatter your foes so that your enemies will flee from your presence, will run away in front of you. And we talked about how the Torah service had this coronation feel to it. It had a real intense vibe of things like dominion endures, and you are sovereign, and give strength to your people. Zion flourish, build the walls. Ark was carried, we say, rise up and scatter your foes. Right? It's very regal, and it feels like we're trying to get the feeling of being in the presence of royalty and some kind of coronation. We talked about how when the ark is open, when the gates are opened, just like Ne'ilah at the Yom Kippur service is seen as a fertile and opportune moment to offer personal prayers. The gate is open. Here you go. Like, don't wait. Now, the moment is ripe. So it's customary to offer personal prayers, and how our Siddur has some selections that you could have if you don't have your own words, or you could just add your own words. We talked about how the Siddur had edited in a particular prayer before the ark that was offered. It's kind of a mystical prayer. And we talked about the connection of the Lurianic mystics, the Safat mystics, and how so much of the Siddur is actually impacted by their particular customs, and how innovative they were, and how even a traditional Siddur has elements that were innovative and were introduced late. We also talked how this was in Aramaic instead of in Hebrew, in the language of the people of the day. We talked about marching the Torah around and that whole kind of feeling, and how the Shema is here, and when you face the ark, all the choreography of the early Torah service, as well as the choreography of the aliyot, holding on to the scrolls, what the prayers mean about how there's a connection between us and God through the Torah when we hold it in that way. And I think we even talked about lifting and wrapping the Torah. I think we left off in talking about all of the extra prayers and blessings for the community and the state of Israel, etc. And I want to spend a little time on that today, more in closely. Specifically the prayer for the state of Israel, and then talk a little bit about putting the Torah away. I don't want to talk about the prayers for the Haftarah blessings. Okay. There are a few traditional tefillot that found their way into the Siddur that are just not classical compositions, but later compositions that this is my take, they're added to make up for something that felt missing. With all the praise of God and the ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc., etc., what about us? The experience, as you well know, of synagogue is a communal experience. It's about the people. And we never pray, just in a good prayer of goodwill for us. So a number of tefillot were added to pray for the community and its own concerns. This is also in Aramaic, so it's written a while back, but it's in a common language. It's not Hebrew. It's not meant to use holy language, scriptural language. Instead, it's meant to convey more everyday language. And we ask, Yekum Purkan min Shemaya. May heaven send deliverance, Purkan. Redemption, deliverance, salvation, those kinds of words. And you can hear some of the Hebrew words. Chizda, that's chesed. Verachamim. And chayim. We're asked for what the congregation needs. And it's interesting, we say we want kindness, love, compassion, very generous, thoughtful, loving, caring, emotional things. We want a long life, abundant provision, meaning enough food and sustenance, bodily, a living, a livelihood, bodily health, and nehora, and insight, enlightenment, spirituality. It's not enough to just have a full belly. You've got to have, some meaning in life. It's very much akin to the hierarchy of needs. I'm sure you're familiar with Maslow, an early sociologist who was well known for articulating that humans have a hierarchy of basic needs. Sure, we need food and shelter and water, but we also need community. We need people and family. We need culture. We need self-realization and fulfillment. But it's awfully hard to have the top part of the hierarchy of fulfillment, spiritual fulfillment, if you don't have basic sustenance and shelter. Hungry, cold people are not worried about self-realization. They're worried about hunger
Rabbi,
and cold. Yeah, Arlene.
I just interrupt. Can you tell somebody's in the waiting room? Or does that show up on your screen?
Hang on. It would. Is somebody in there? I don't think so. I
Well,
don't think
Shirley
so.
Froelich, I mean, I can't tell, but Shirley Froelich asked for the link, and so I gave it to her. So I don't know how long it's going to take her. I didn't know whether it would show up on your screen.
Okay, it should show up. It could show. It could. If she chimes in that she can't get in or she's waiting, let me know. Okay, cool. So I appreciate this. And usually in congregations where this said, it's either said in English or it's said quietly because it's Aramaic and it's a little bit tongue twistery. Usually people will sing the beginning, Yakum Purkan Min Shemaya, and then they'll say the rest to themselves. And there's a little melody at the end, Maran Divishemaya, Yehe Besadechon Kozman Veidan Vinomar Amen. And the same with the next paragraph that talks about those who serve the community, meaning people who help make shul happen. As you all well know, it takes a lot of people to make shul happen. It doesn't just happen. May God who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless this entire congregation. Kahal HaKadosh Hazeh, with all the other holy congregations, them, their families, and everything that they have, everybody who's theirs, right? Bless us, meaning us regular old folks, not just the holy people, Abraham, but bless us. By the way, in older Siddurim, traditional Siddurim, it doesn't say their families, it says their wives. Hem uneshehem. My guess is if you go to the Art Scroll Siddur and you look at the Shabbat service, and I'm doing it right now, and you go to the Yikum Purkans and the Misha Berach. Yep. May God bless our ancestors, not Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Bless this Kahal HaKadosh with all others. Haim uneshehem, their wives, their sons, and their daughters. In other words, who is the holy congregation? The men. And more specifically, the married, heteronormative, progenerative men. Me. I'm happy to let go of that, honestly. It had its privilege, but it's kind of sucks anyway. So opening that up is beneficial to everybody, including those who had the privilege. But it's just, we take that stuff for granted, and I don't want us to take it for granted because it shouldn't be. And it wasn't that long ago. And in some congregations, it still isn't, that they consider the congregation to be the men and the extra supporting characters to be the women and children. And I'll just give a little polemic here. Any Orthodox Jew who tells you, yeah, but we don't believe that. We consider women to be equal parts and they have a more spiritual, more important place. I say, but your liturgy doesn't say that. It says them and their wives, meaning like your language betrays the truth. So either you change your language or admit that is not what you really think. That's the end of my polemic. But I think it's important to remember here, like the specifics. We get into kind of really interesting details. We say, Mi shemiyachadim batei knesiot litfilah. people who establish synagogues, meaning founders, board members, funders, right? There's communities don't just show up. A small group of people who have resources get together and say, you know what, guys, we need to have a community. We need to build something. We need to give of our own to the community and make something happen. Those are very special people. They're pretty rare and unusual people. They have a rare combination of resource and devotion. So we say those people who established synagogues, who found synagogues. You know better than me that our synagogue was founded by a small group of people. There were just a handful of families. They said, it's not enough to just be here. We have to found a place, make a shul. It was expensive. It was hard. And believe me, they argued about 100,000 little things. Their board meetings were just like our board meetings. And they didn't have telephone. They had to actually show up in each other's houses, spend hours talking about it. They had to handwrite everything, copy everything by hand. So it was a tremendous effort to establish a synagogue. And here we are praying in the synagogue. So we're grateful, and we ask blessing for those who, made it happen. And for everybody who comes to pray, because had they done all that work and the next generation not maintained the tefillah, their work would have been for nothing. And those who provide for the maintenance, everybody who joins and pays dues and gives donations and helps out and volunteers, and everyone who gives wine for kiddush and havdalah and food and bread and tzedakah and shelter. We're a multi-service industry. We're a complex corporation. Every Shabbos, every single Shabbos that I'm there, there's vegan challah. It doesn't just show up. Bernard makes it. He makes sure I have it. Wine, there's wine every Shabbat. We don't make that wine, we buy it. Someone has to buy it, prepare it, have it, make sure we have it, bring it into the sanctuary, uncork it, pour it, etc. Someone has to do all that stuff. I don't do that. All the small things. I sometimes think we should pray this prayer much more prominently. It's really important to think about all the little things it takes just to make a single Shabbat morning service pull off without a hitch. It's a lot. And the compelling majority of it is not done by the professional clergy. Building the shul, making the shul, maintaining the shul, opening the shul, caring for the shul, making the food, bringing in the things, caring for the sick, caring for the homeless. That's dozens, if not hundreds of people. So we acknowledge it. And in case we missed anybody, whenever you make a list, you're always like, I hope I didn't miss anybody. And we just add, and all who devote themselves to the need of the community and the building of Eretz Yisrael. And we pray that God will keep them and keep them whole and healthy and bless their worthy endeavors, et cetera, et cetera. In our Siddur, we have a prayer for Shalom Haaretz, the renewal of creation. That's not in traditional Siddurim. It was written, as you see over here, by Danny Nevins. Danny Nevins is a colleague of mine. He graduated 2 years behind me. He was the former dean of the rabbinical school. He's an accomplished synagogue rabbi and halachist. He wrote many interesting contemporary halachic discourses. And he wrote this as an environmental concern. We're praying for the earth. That's new. Our Siddur has some new things. Brand new, written by somebody younger than me. The two things that are new but sort of more traditional are a prayer for the country, meaning for our country, the United States, and a prayer for the state of Israel. And these have been in American Siddurim for 2, maybe 3 generations. It's not that new. But when it first was that somebody wrote a prayer for the United States government, that was new, obviously, because the United States is just not that old. In Jewish time, the United States is a very modern phenomenon. We're not impressed by a couple hundred years. And the same is true for the state of Israel. The state of Israel is even younger. So no Siddurim had a prayer for the state of Israel before, 80 years ago. The prayer for our country actually has some history. There are prayer books written by early American rabbis who, like Stephen Wise, I don't know if you've heard that name. There are Reform synagogues that are named after him. He was an early, very prominent Reform rabbi in the United States. He wrote a prayer for the government in which we say, hang on, I'm going to go to an earlier one because the Lev Shalem changed it around a little bit. And I want to get the other one correct. Hold on. Here. By the way, many Orthodox Siddurim do not have this. It's a little bit controversial, as you might imagine. Should we say this? Why should we say this? How should we say this? Politics can always be difficult and controversial. Hang on. Okay. Our God and God of our ancestors, we ask your blessings for our country, for its government, for its leaders and its advisors, and for all who exercise just and rightful authority. We're praying for our government and judges, anyone who exercises not authority, just and rightful authority. Those are 2 very important qualifiers. Teach them insights from your Torah, that they may administer affairs of state fairly, that peace and security, happiness and prosperity, justice and freedom may forever abide in our midst. Now you can see that we've changed that a little bit. In Lev Shalem, this, by the way, has changed a little bit from earlier tefillot, Lishlom Hamidina, prayers for the well-being of the government and the state. But ours even made more adjustments. And I think the reason for that is an evolving sensibility about what makes good government. I think that's mixed with a little bit of political correctness, if I'm being honest. For example, our prayer for the country doesn't say prosperity. It says, where is it? So that peace and security, happiness and freedom will never depart from our land, as opposed to that peace and security, happiness and prosperity justice, and freedom may forever abide in our midst. There's Shirley. That's different. It carries a very different valence. Happiness and freedom is different from happiness and prosperity, justice and freedom. Why eliminate prosperity? But we're not interested in prosperity? Money's bad? Ooh, bad money. Ooh, bad. I don't think that. See what I mean? That's just my take. I could be reading too much into it. But even the fact that our Siddur has an alternative prayer for the country, in addition to the one that we've changed in, on the side of our Siddur is an alternative prayer for the country. Over here. It's different. Again, new and written for this Siddur. That's okay, you can write new stuff. All of this at one point was new. Here's another interesting difference in the prayer for the state of Israel. And as you can imagine, this prayer is a little bit different in Israeli Siddurim than it is in American Siddurim. And the Orthodox and conservative Siddurim in Israel have a slightly different tefillah for the state of Israel. But there has been a prayer for the state of Israel for quite a long time. And several different ones were around. You can see over here in the notes on the side, this one was composed by Israel's chief rabbis and then was edited by Shai Agnon somewhat later. Avinu, and all of these use very traditional language. Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father who art in heaven. Tzur Yisrael, that's very typical language from the Bible. Ugoalo, and its Redeemer. The Redeemer in the stronghold of the people Israel. Bless the state of Israel. Now the original tefillah just said, Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu. The first flowering, the beginning of our redemption. Because there was a feeling of messianism, of that the rebirth of the state of Israel would bring about a larger spiritual radical transformation, that this was just the beginning of something bigger. Not everybody was comfortable with that. Some people are Zionists with a strong messianic religious overtone, and some people are Zionists not with a strong messianic overtone. Some people believe that the birth of the state of Israel is the beginning of a new era in Jewish history, and some people believe that it might be the beginning of a new era, but might not be. Depends how things go. So in Lev Shalem, which is not true in the previous, in Siddur Sim Shalom, it adds in the parentheses, in the brackets, that it might be the first flowering of our redemption, the beginning of redemption. Not that it is, but we hope that it can be. It's couching your words. I'm critical of that personally. I don't like that. Either put it in there, not in the brackets, declare that we don't accept the notion that this is the beginning, or just say it's the beginning. Stop couching your words. Oh, it might be the beginning. Might be the beginning. Do you think it is or it isn't? If you don't think it is, don't say it. I'm cool with taking things out, but I don't like the couching. It smacks of reactivity to me. But that is really just me. That you're free to disagree with me on that, and I can really see again, these changes are a reflection of changing sensibilities about all of these things. Not everybody thinks about Israel the way they did 30 years ago, and that's all right. Things change. We do ask that God protect the state of Israel, shield it with your love and spread over it the shelter of peace. And we ask that the leaders and advisors of Israel also be guided by the light and truth of God. We want strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land, deliver them, right? Save soldiers. This is those who defend our holy land means soldiers. Strengthen the hands, make our soldiers strong, protect them. And crown their effort with victory, triumph, nitzachon. We want to win battles. And bless our land with peace and its inhabitants with joy. Amen. Me personally, I started something many moons ago when I really started to become more sensitive about the issues of minorities and Arabs in Israel and in places that Israel controls. And I added not its inhabitants, liyoshveha, but lekol yoshveha, all its inhabitants. It's like, this is a Jewish prayer, but I want it to be a Jewish prayer of peace. V'natata shalom ba'aretz. We want peace in the land. V'simchat olam liyoshveha, and lasting joy for all of its inhabitants. Otherwise, it's not lasting joy and peace. And so in my own prayers, I started adding the word kol yoshveha, all of its inhabitants. Are you allowed to do that? Yeah, hell yeah, you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to add and subtract from the Siddur in ways that reflect you personally. And I think these prayers reflect that maybe more than most prayers do, because they're so contemporary. And our own contemporary experience is still a live situation. Things change. Our attitude towards the temple in Jerusalem doesn't change, depending on who's in office. But our attitude about the government might. So those immediate experiences in some ways beg us to make subtle and slight changes. Okay. Any questions up to there? Anything about any of those pieces? If not, I want to quickly look at the closing off piece of the Torah service, the returning of the ark, and then turn back to the Ashrei. Okay. So just as we marched the Torah around on the way out, brought the Torah down from up on the mountain, bringing it down to the people, walking it around. It's a very democratizing kind of symbolism and gesture. The Torah is taken out of the ark, and before it's read, it's brought amongst the people for us to both venerate it and to receive it. Torah doesn't do anybody any good sitting in the ark up on Mount Sinai, right? There's a reason that it was given. It has to be received and given. Bringing the Torah to people, it's not isolated for a few. It's not only Moses who gets it, everybody gets it. And so we again march the Torah around and again have a kind of coronation-like feeling. All of the expressions of Vayarem Keren, to lift up the redemption. Hodu, Yehalelu, praise God, sing God's praises. All of those things are Romimu, lift up, raise up. Havu Ladonai, acclaim God. Acclaim, acclaim, acclaim. Glorious thunder. Power, majesty, shatters the cedars of Lebanon, right? These are descriptions of God as powerful and as more powerful than all the other gods and all the other kings. And so we end the Torah service with a very similar kind of vibe by reciting this psalm. And then we have the other passage from the Torah that matches the first one. If you remember, we said, Vayehi bin Soa ha'aron. When the ark was moved, Moses said this, Uvenucha, and when the ark was set down, Moses said, Shuva Adonai, Rivavot Alfei Yisrael. Adonai, may you dwell among the many families of the people Israel. Return, Adonai, to your sanctuary, you and your glorious ark. And you have that feeling of dwell with us, shuva, sit, dwell, rest. The Torah comes out and is brought, it enlivens, it uplifts, it illuminates. And then when it rests, it brings that quiet, calm, all of its paths are peace. Renew us, that sense of calm and quiet, righteousness, faithfulness, less of the coronation and more of the indwelling. Not God the King on the throne on high, but the God who dwells with us, tree of life to those who hold to it. It's more about the Torah itself. Okay, any questions on any of that? No. Okay, so let's set aside our Siddurim for just a second. Let's go over here. Can you see that? Yes, Brachot 4b. You see that? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. This is from the Talmud in Masechet Brachot, the passage, the volume that deals with blessings and with a lot of the aspects of tefillah. The discussion that preceded it has to do with saying the Hashkivenu is part of the Shema, right? So it's unrelated directly, but one of the things that Rabbi Yochanan says up above about juxtaposing redemption and tefillah, a similar statement is cited, right? So, I need to do that. So this is a small that the Talmud is taking from its current discussion, and it's going to discuss Psalm 145, which is Ashrei. Actually, hang on one second. When we say the Ashrei, it's kind of a little deceptive or inaccurate, because these first two lines are taken from a different psalm. Okay, so the psalm we're really talking about, it starts here. Tehillah LeDavid. This is the acrostic. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled, right? These are added. as introductory lines to the recitation of the Ashrei. Here you see here. For synagogue use, 2 verses were added to the beginning of Psalm 145, both of which begin with the word Ashrei. Here's the 2 sections. And it was these additional verses that gave the name Ashrei to this prayer. The first verse, with speech of happy are those who dwell in your house, is especially appropriate in the context of synagogue prayer, the house, right? Similarly, at the end, we say, we praise Adonai now and for always, is appended from another psalm. So here, this last Va'anachnu nevarech Yah is added on. You see, here's where Psalm 145 ends with the verse that has the Tav. Okay, so we're really only talking about Psalm 145, that middle acrostic. Rabbi Elazar said that in the name of Rabbi Avina, anyone who recites Tehillah David, this psalm, 3 times every day is assured a place in the world to come. You don't have to be a Jewish scholar to know that assured a place in the world to come is a really good thing. That's obviously good. And all you have to do, that's it. All you have to do, it's so powerful, this psalm, that if you say it 3 times every day, you're guaranteed a place in the world to come. So that's a very powerful statement, right? Don't worry about whether that's true or not, because we have no way of knowing any more than he had any way of knowing. It's a rhetorical device meant to impress upon you just how powerful and important this psalm is. And of course, the Gemara asks, Mai ta'ama? Why? What is it about that particular psalm that is so amazing that it guarantees you this amazing thing? And it's going to go through a couple of possibilities. You could say that it's because it is arranged alphabetically. Right? In other words, it's got A to Z. It's comprehensive. It's all inclusive. That's a good argument, right? If you can do the A to Z 3 times a day, you encompass every idea, right? The whole point of an acrostic is it encompasses everything. There's only one problem with that, according to the Talmud. If you said it's because it's arranged alphabetically, I would say you should say Psalm 119, not Psalm 145, because Psalm 119 is an acrostic where every letter has 8 verses. There's 8 aleph and 8 bets and 8 gimels. So if comprehensive is what you're after, this is not the most comprehensive one. There's another acrostic that's 8 times better. It's a good argument, right? You understand they're arguing?
Mhm.
So then he's going to propose another reason why this one. Rather, this is the reason. Because it contains, you open your hand, meaning it contains reference to the fact that God provides sustenance to all that lives. The universal goodness of God's open hand in giving. God is the source of all blessings, is the teaching of this, and that is such a fundamentally profound idea that if you remember, Poteach et yadecha umasbia lechol chai ratzon, 3 times a day, you have spiritual enlightenment. If that's the case, says the Talmud, he should have recited Psalm 136, not 145, the great Hallel, Hodu Ladonai Kitov, because that has numerous praises, including who provides food, noten lechem lechol basar ki leolam chasto. He gives food to all that lives. And it has all kinds of hodus and all these great things that God does. So there's a better psalm for that too. This is not the perfect psalm for that. All right. Now, so far, I don't have a reason to explain the statement of Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Avinu. As far as I'm concerned now, he's making a unsupported claim that reciting this can, lead to this amazing enlightenment. Ella, here's the real reason. It has both. It's both an alphabetical acrostic and it references God's generosity of sustenance. In other words, it's the combination of recognizing God's universal greatness and universality and God's intimate provision for each and every person. When you say the Ashrei, you reflect on God, the transcendent God, who is the master of all things. And you reflect on God who feeds each living creature on earth, the intimate, providential God. The transcendent, yes. The intimate, yes. Those other psalms have one or the other. This has them both. Now, Rabbi Yochanan then is going to add, since we're talking about this psalm, Rabbi Yochanan says, and since we're talking about the value of acrostics, Rabbi Yochanan says, hey, you guys know, of course, that what's true about the Ashrei as an acrostic? It's not actually an acrostic. It's missing a letter. It's missing the letter Nun. Why is there no Nun in the Ashrei? Did you ever wonder that? Did you notice before? There's no Nun. Every other letter. Samech, Yud, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Samech. It goes from Malchutecha to Somech. Here's the Mem. Here's the Samech. There's no Nun. So Rabbi Yochanan says, hey, what's up with that? Why is there no Nun? And he answers, because this is a difficult answer. Okay, so I want you to try to just go with the flow here for a second. Mipnei sheyesh ba mapalatan shel sonei Yisrael. There's no Nun because the letter Nun contains an allusion to the downfall of Israel's enemies. What? Well, like I said, what? That doesn't not make any sense. Wouldn't we be happy about the downfall of the enemies of Israel? Right? Why wouldn't you? We just talked about, arise, O Lord, disperse your enemies, defeat them. That's the whole Torah service. Why would we be concerned about the downfall, about an allusion? It's not even an overt reference, it's just an allusion. It's got a little hint of the downfall of our enemies. I mean, why would we hesitate to say that? That's not a thing you hesitate to say. Okay. In order to understand this little piece of Talmud, you have to understand how the rabbis think. They don't like to say bad things explicitly. The enemies of Israel means Israel. They don't want to say it contains a reference to the downfall of Israel, because they don't want to even give voice to saying the downfall of Israel. Just by saying those words. It's bad words. There's like mojo to those words that are not good. I'll give you another example. When talking about a person who cannot see, a blind person, the rabbis have a euphemism for someone who cannot see. They call him a man of adequate sight. A well-sighted man. They don't want to say a blind man. So they wink and they say a well-sighted man. And everyone knows what they're talking about. They're talking about a blind man. But saying blind is just, gosh, it's bad. It's mean. It's not nice. It's negative.
Just
It carries
rude.
a negative connotation. It's like how people used to, whisper diseases. He's got diabetes. You don't want to say it. Don't even say that word. Don't say it. Because, words have power by being said. And so when they say the enemies of Israel, they mean Israel. But they don't want to say the destruction of Israel. So they say the destruction of the enemies of Israel. And wink, wink. Those who know will know. So the reason they claim that the nun is dropped is because nun, as a letter, makes you think of the word nafal, fallen. And there's a verse here from Amos that describes the destruction of Israel. The virgin of Israel has fallen and will rise no more. It's a prophecy of the destruction of Israel. And when you read the letter nun, when you see a nun, you will think of this verse. You'll think of the word nafal. And nafal is negative. And the whole rest of the psalm is very positive. All this good stuff about God. And so due to this, Ashrei does not include a verse beginning with the letter nun. In order to ease the harsh meaning of that verse, B'ma'arava, in the west, in Eretz Israel, this verse, meaning the verse from Amos, they interpreted it slightly differently, and they went on to say, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, even so, David went on and provided further support, because although David did not include a verse beginning with the letter Nun, he knew that the verse that would be written by Amos much later, and the very next verse begins with the letter Samech and says, what? What's the next verse of the Ashrei? Somech Adonai lechol hanoflim. God lifts up all who are fallen. So the nun is there to remain a silent marker, is not there rather, to remain a silent marker anticipated through prophecy by David of the future downfall of the Jewish people in the land of Israel and their ultimate exile. And he comforts us in the psalm in the very next verse by saying, don't worry if you've fallen, God uplifts those who are fallen. Is that, you understand? Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, do you like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? It's interesting. It gets you thinking about the language and the acrostic nature and how choices and decisions are made as to what to include in the Siddur. When Rabbi Elazar quoted Rabbi Avina in his opinion about Psalm 145, there was no Siddur that had Psalm 145 in it 3 times a day. Rabbi Avina said we should do that. He is suggesting, do this. This should become part of our spiritual practice. He's advocating for it as a practice. Recite this psalm every day. This will guarantee you some spiritual success. And then there's a discussion, why? Like, why? Why did the things we say work? Well, they only work if they work, right? I mean, it's not just mumbo jumbo. We're saying things that are meant to evoke ideas, references, to be self-referential. Now, I want to finish by sharing with you the following. Here's the question. There's 2 possibilities. One is there was never a nun. Whoever wrote this wrote it intentionally without a nun. These rabbis in the Talmud are speculating about David. They did not know David. They're living, a long time after King David. They're speculating, intelligently speculating, but speculating. We don't know why David didn't include a nun. It's a pretty weird thing, right? To write an acrostic and to leave out a letter. That's the whole point of an acrostic, is that it has every letter.
Do the other psalms have the nun in them?
All the other acrostics are complete acrostics. This is the only one that has a glitch. Now, it could be original. Or there's another possibility. There was a nun, and somehow it got lost.
Yeah.
Right? That happens. It's what's called a scribal error. People had to write this stuff down. And you're writing through a line, and you go back and you look and you skip a line and you wrote the next line. You just skipped it. You kept writing. And then someone copies yours. And once they copy yours, someone else copies that. And the copies get the copies, the copies get the copies. And once there's enough copies without a nun, there's no nun. So maybe there was an original nun that got lost somewhere along the line. How would you know? Okay, so here's where you have to put on a little research hat. You could know, you could try to figure this out. We might not know, but we could try to figure it out. And in the conservative movement, we embrace the scientific study of Judaism. We say there's a scientific, a process-oriented way to think about our own religion. The Wissenschaft des Judentums, a Wissenschaft, a intellectually honest, scientifically critical way to analyze our own literature. Hey, let's ask. I'm going to pose a theory that there was a nun. And I'm going to put that theory to the test. It was lost somewhere along the way. So if I want to prove that, here's what I have to do. I have to go to this book. One of my favorite books. The Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. Boy, that'll get you prizes at a cocktail party. The Stuttgart Hebrew Bible. And what the Stuttgart Hebrew Bible is, it's a work of Christian scholarship. Here's all the German Lutheran reverends who organized and wrote it. And what it is it's a compilation of all the manuscript evidence of the Hebrew Bible. They analyzed many existing manuscripts, handwritten, old Bibles, written by hand before the printing press. Once you get the printing press, errors get repeated by the millions. So handwritten evidence, manuscripts of the Bible. and records every variation from the Masoretic text. The text in the middle is what we were talking about before, the official text of the Bible as founded by the Masoretes. And then the notes at the bottom are all of the variations. Places where the manuscript differs from the Masoretic Bible. And as you can see, there are a lot of them. The manuscripts that exist of the Bible do not all match each other. There are different versions of it. The Masoretes chose from amongst different manuscripts when they made the official version. And even then, it wasn't the official version. All right, what does all this mean for us? What it means for us is that in one manuscript, and only one, there is a nun.
There is or is not
There is.
a nun.
There are hundreds of manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible. In none of them is there a nun, with the exception of one. Right down here at the bottom. And this is what the verse says. It's a Syriac manuscript. It's an old Syriac manuscript. I believe it's actually in some library in Russia or something like that.
I don't know what Syriac means.
Syriac is a kind of script, a kind of writing.
Okay.
So it's a manuscript of the Bible that's written in different characters.
Okay.
Okay, same words, different characters.
Like Cyrillic.
Ne'eman Adonai bechol devarav, v'chasid bechol ma'asav. God is loyal, faithful in all of his words, and righteous in all of his deeds. It reads very much like the rest of the psalm, right? Bam 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 bam. Ashrei yoshvei beitecha od yalalucha sela. Right? Somech Adonai lechol hanoflim, v'zokef lechol hakfufim. God does this to these people and this to these people. Very similar kind of vibe. Could easily fit right in there. Makes perfect sense. Could it be that this is the passage that's not authentic, but that is more original, and all the others are a reflection of an error in which it was dropped? Or could this reflect the independent creativity of a particular scribe who felt that this was missing? And even though it's not, according to the scribe's handbook, he was like, I'm going to write a verse and make one up that fills this gap and reflects what I think might have been. Or did David write that one? And somewhere early on, the error occurred and got dropped. We don't know. The compelling majority of the manuscript evidence suggests that there never was a nun and that there is some original reason why, though we may not ever know it. But we cannot really dismiss the possibility that there was a nun, that its absence is not intentional, that any meaning derived from its absence comes only from the interpretation of subsequent generations, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but let's just know it. And that David actually wrote a nun.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. That's the kind of stuff I think about, when I'm lying in bed in the middle of the night.
Sort of like the game telephone, when you start telling somebody and
Right.
then doesn't get left off. I think so.
Right. And people do tend to make stuff up in telephone. They hear, they want to correct what they think is wrong. You know, right? They will get someone will say it's the gymming jewel, and they'll be like, no, I know it's the swimming pool. So they say swimming pool, but they don't know really. Like it could have been different on purpose. That's why scribes are supposed to not change stuff, because there's no end, and if you're going to change stuff that you don't think is right, there's all kinds of stuff. Nah, that's not right. This would be better this way, right? Now, you're not supposed to introduce your own personal stuff into it. You're supposed to be a stenographer. But then when there are errors don't get corrected because they're so dogmatically committed to writing exactly what's there that they copy exactly what's there, even if it's even if they think it's wrong. They copy it because that's what's there, and they are copyists, not editors or fill in the blank people. Yeah.
Oh,
all right.
okay.
I think we're going to end there tonight. Thank you, everybody. This was really fun. A good session. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah.